Hey guys, tonight we journey into the quietly clattering world of medieval Italy, not to battlefields or palazzos, but to something far more domestic and suspiciously shiny. You find yourself standing in the smoky kitchen of a 14th century Florentine townhouse, barefoot on cold flagstone. The hearth glows low, stew bubbles thick in a copper pot, and around you, an army of spoons, hanging from pegs, resting on folded cloth, nestled in drawers lined with faded linen. Each one is different. Each one has a name. It's not spoon like we'd say today, but things like La Spoffortress, Il Secco, or Laffagobrodo. And yes, they all have a job. Some of them take that job very seriously. You're about to spend the night in a place where cutlery had names, jobs, feuds, romances, and the occasional minor sainthood. It's niche, it's old, it's excessively detailed. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pick up Il Mesto, the melancholic one, and feel the worn indent in the wood where 6 generations of hands have held it. This spoon only ever stirs lentil soup. If it touches minestrone, someone swears a relative will develop gout. That's the rule. You look over at La Pazza, the crazy one, with a bent neck and scorch marks, used only for tasting sauces that might be cursed or oversalted. Same thing in this house. The tradition began as most strange things do, out of boredom, ritual, and a pinch of spiritual paranoia. In medieval Italy, the household was a universe, and kitchen tools were not just tools, they were participants. Every spoon was part of a delicate choreography of soup, sin, inheritance, and superstition. It's late at night now, and you're slipping into that warm stillness of old wood, coal smoke, and clinking tin. Historians still argue whether this tradition began with the monastic inventories of the 1200s, or with peasant households desperate to differentiate the good spoon from the one used to scoop pig medicine. But by the time you get to Florence around 1320, naming spoons has become both absurd and completely normal. Rich families commissioned silversmiths to etch names into the handles. Middle-class homes pass names down orally. The poor just scratch initials into the side and pray they never lose track of which spoon is which. You spot a wooden spoon labeled Zanetta, the little tusk, reserved exclusively for thick bean mash. It's not because it is best suited, but because someone's grandmother once saw it poke a guest in the lip, and she declared it had bitten him with a pig's tooth. That label stuck harder than the dried fava paste still crusted near the rim. In this house, there are over 40 spoons. Not because they re-wealthy though they aren't, poor either, but because the great-grandfather was a minor guild poet who believed each new family recipe deserved its own utensil. Every time he invented a new soup, he'd carve a new spoon and name it something dramatic. There's La Cantatrica, the soprano for chickpea broth with lemon, and Il Traditore, the traitor, for a suspicious leek blend that gave everyone stomach issues in 1297 and was never made again. The spoon survived, the recipe didn't. You move to the drawer where the guest spoons live. These are not for family use. They're prettier, shinier, and ironically less trustworthy. One spoon here is hollow, not as in deep bowl hollow. No, it's literally hollow double-walled, used by a long-gone aunt to sneak extra wine from a cousin's goblet during dinner prayers. She called it Il Sospirante, the sighing one. Whether from the wine vapors or the general family tension, no one's sure. Here's a fun fact. The oldest surviving named spoon in Europe was discovered in Tuscany. Carved from bone, with the word Marutzella etched in uneven Latin script along the shaft. Scholars still debate whether that S the spoon's name or the name of the woman who chewed on it during childbirth. Either way, it now lives in a museum behind glass, safe from soup. There's a theory unconfirmed, deeply speculative. And therefore our favorite kind that spoon naming became popular among merchant wives who wanted to keep track of kitchen stock during long absences. A named spoon is harder to steal, or at least harder to replace unnoticed. If you lose Lunetta, your rice stirrer, you can't just sneak in a generic spoon. It won't be Lunetta. It won't feel like her. And heaven help the maid who gets caught using lunetta on barley. In aristocratic homes, things got even more ridiculous. There are records from Lucca of spoons named after battle victories, saints, dogs. In Once Bozarlia, fictional romance hero named Calzolino, who never appears in any other historical record. Just a spoon, just one spoon, the perfectly carved, smirking face on the handle. Scholars argue whether Calzolino was a local joke or a lost literary figure, but the spoon's still around. The practice wasn't always so organized. Earlier records show that some names were cruel, like Laskioka, probably given to a warped or cursed utensil no one trusted. Others were weirdly affectionate, like Chochetta, little suckler, used to feed infants and sometimes old uncles with missing teeth. You turn, and a tall, delicate spoon glints in the corner, displayed upright in a wooden stand. Its name, La Signora, the lady. It's not used anymore. It hasn't touched food in 100 years. It's the ancestral risotto spoon, made of perwood, blessed by a friar, and once according to family legend used to stir a meal that brought two feuding neighbors to peace. That risotto, for the record, included saffron, fennel, and an accidental shaving of soap mistaken for cheese. Peace through hygiene. Night thickens. The fire burns lower, and you begin to notice how quiet this room is except for the creaking wood, the wind pressing against the shutters, and the faint echo of names murmured through generations. Because here, a spoon isn't just an object. It's a memory you can hold in your hand. You wake slowly, or at least you feel like you do even though you never really left. The flickering hearth is still glowing, just slightly dimmer. Shadows stretch longer across the kitchen walls now, dancing over shelves of spice jars and bundles of herbs. The spoons are still here too, nestled in their assigned nooks like sleepy little guardians. Tonight's shift moves to the far end of the table, where something softer and more sentimental is kept. The birth spoons. You walk over barefoot, the stone floor cool against your soles, and lift a cloth bundle tied with fading blue ribbon. Inside, 4 carefully carved spoons, each with different handles and different names. These aren't just utensils, they're birthbed heirlooms, passed from generation to generation, used for one very specific moment. Feeding a newborn its first spoonful of broth, you think it might be overkill? Until you see how delicately these spoons are carved and how seriously the names are embroidered on the linen pouch. The oldest among them is Benedetta, the Blessed One. Polished olive wood, a deep bowl for liquids, but flat enough to press gently against a baby's lips. It's been used, supposedly, for every child in the family since 1274, that S when great-great whoever accidentally spilled gruel on a newborn S forehead and, in a panic, declared it a baptism. No one corrected him. The spoon was deemed holy. From then on, Benedetta was reserved only for first feedings and, only at the exact hour the child was born. No cheating. Historians still argue whether this type of naming was widespread or limited to a handful of obsessive Tuscan households. Some say it reflects the growing emphasis on ritual and domestic life. Others argue it was just a clever way to keep nosy in-laws from accidentally using the baby S spoon for mustard. Either way, you're looking at a spoon with over 150 years of baby spit on it. That's commitment. Next to Benedetta lies Zuccarina, the little sugar. A silver spoon with a fluted handle and tiny honeycomb engraved at the base. It was used only for sweet water, a mix of boiled sugar and chamomile meant to soothe cranky infants. One time, it was accidentally dipped into strong onion broth, and the resulting baby tantrum lasted for days. Ever since Zuccarina was forbidden from entering the soup zone, it's now considered sweet use only. There's even a fraying note stitched into the linen pouch. Warning, she cries, if you cross-contaminate. Then there's Georgetta, named not after anyone in the family, but after a favorite goat, who had 37 kids and reportedly never once sneezed. That goat was considered miraculous. The spoon named after her was made from cherry wood, small and chubby, shaped more like a scoop than a spoon. It's for the transitional gruels, the lumpy, gently mashed stuff given to babies just before their first teeth. The logic? If Georgetta the goat could handle 37 kids, the spoon could surely survive one more messy toddler. The last one in the bundle is the oddball, La Nonna Vuota, the empty grandma. It's not a real spoon. It's a stub of worn wood, barely shaped, splintered at the tip. But the family insists it belonged to the oldest matriarch who, when too old to chew, would pretend to eat using this spoon just to feel included at dinner. Over time, it became symbolic. Now, every time a new baby is born, La Nonna Vuda is tapped gently on the cradle as a kind of blessing. Or maybe just a reminder. One day you'll be old too, and still faking it through soup. You can almost hear the quiet clink of these spoons being prepared on birth nights. The whispered prayers. The nervous laughter. The occasional wrong spoon causing someone to gasp and demand the fire be reblessed. One recorded instance from Pisa in 1312 tells of a mother-in-law who grabbed the wrong spoon peperina, meant for adult sand, accidentally fed the newborn rosemary broth. The child was fine. The mother-in-law was not. Her punishment. She had to whittle the replacement spoon herself, blindfolded, with a butter knife. A mainstream historical fact. In many parts of Europe, but particularly Italy, spoons were associated with life-stage rituals. Just like candles had baptismal purposes and bells were blessed at weddings. Spoons were often sanctified and assigned spiritual meaning. Church inventories from the 1300s list domestic sacramentals, including wooden utensils, marked for birth, burial, and fasting. So yes, spoons had ranks. Some were closer to God than others. This may explain why that one fork still isn't allowed near the stew pot. It knows what it did. You brush your fingers across Zuccarina's handle and notice a faint bump and engraving of a crescent moon. That detail isn't accidental. In many households, the moon symbolized good sleep and soft digestion, two things medieval babies rarely had at the same time. A spoon engraved with the moon was considered lucky, especially if used during certain lunar phases. Historians are still divided over whether these lunar traditions were based on astronomy, superstition, or just collective exhaustion. The fire crackles. A mouse scurries across a beam. You realize something quietly radical about this whole practice. It turned ordinary moments feeding a child, stirring soup, scraping a bowl into rituals. These named spoons are artifacts, yes, but also characters in the family drama. They've witnessed births, illnesses, reconciliations, probably at least one dramatic stir-related divorce. Through it all, they've kept their shape, their name, and their place in the drawer. And the drawer is sacred. In one diary from a Genoese merchant's wife, there's a line that reads, "We keep our blessed spoons near the salted lemons, where the light is dim and the damp does not rot." That's borderline poetic. It's probably written at 3 a.m. during a colicky baby episode. Still, it shows how seriously they took these tiny wooden elders. You tuck the bundle back into its cloth, tie the blue ribbon, and set it gently beneath a shelf labeled Per Vita, for life. That's what these spoons are for, after all. To begin things. To mark the start. To remind every new arrival in the house, you're part of this absurd, tender, overnamed tradition now. You make your way from the cradle spoons toward the pantry door, where a draft of oregano and garlic wafts through from the drying racks beyond. There, hung low along a string of cured sausages and a suspiciously dusty wine bottle, dangle 3 humble, battered spoons. Their names are carved not in elegant script or shining silver, but scratched clumsily with a nail or burned in with an ember. They are pasta spoons, not serving spoons, not cooking ladles. These are the working class of the spoon world. One reads Strozza Preti, the priest strangler. Another is Lena Chiota, the flirt. The last stand it's difficult not to laugh is Pippinella la Squarcia, one-eyed Pippinella. You lift that last one and inspect the missing chunk in its bowl, presumably scorched off during a pasta incident too dramatic to record. This is where it gets surprisingly technical. See, in medieval Italy, pasta wasn't just a food group, it was a theology. Different shapes, different sauces, different levels of social acceptability, and each had its own designated spoon. Not just in function, but in identity. A spoon for linguine had no business being used for orecchiette. That's not just improper. That's an insult to the noodle. Mainstream historical fact. By the 14th century, Italian households were already developing highly localized pasta customs. In Tuscany alone, there were over 30 unique pasta variants, saying many were so saucy. Stringy or sticky, they required special tools to deal with. Not formal pasta spoons as we know them today, but wooden utensils carved with shapes or notches to better cradle the noodle at hand. Naming these spoons helped track their purpose and also, hilariously, elevated their drama. Take strozzapreti. This spoon has a long handle, a narrow bowl, a deep groove along the side, perfect for scooping twisted dough shapes that tend to clump together. Its name is a reference to the pasta strozzapreti, supposedly so delicious that priests choked themselves trying to eat too fast. The spoon, then, wasn't just a tool, it was a silent partner in this ecclesiastical hazard. It's a joke. This spoon finishes the job. You hold it, and it's heavier than expected. The grain of the wood is stained with tomato. The handle is dark from years of gripping. Someone carved a tiny cross near the base knot for piety, but possibly for good luck in the face of dinner. Then there's Lina Kyoto. She's a flirty little thing, short, wide-bowled. Perfect for scooping loose pasta like cavatelli or gnocchetti from a shallow pan without damaging their pillowy softness. Why is she flirty? Because, as family lore has it, she once slipped from a cook's hand and landed in the lap of a visiting nobleman, who then fell in love with the cook on the spot. Historians still argue whether that story was invented by bored grandmothers, or if it genuinely happened during a diplomatic dinner in Bologna. Either way, the spoon is here, and the cook's great-grandchildren still wink when they pass it. You twirl Pippinella Lasquerzia in your hand, and notice she is completely off balance. She tips to one side, her bowl thinner than the rest. Once used for lasagna sheets, which had to be ladled gently from the water with precision. One mistake, and the whole sheet rips, ruins, and offends at least 3 dead relatives watching from the afterlife. Pippinella, damaged in a fire, lost part of her spoon bowl, but no one had the heart to throw her away. She now gets ceremonial use during Lent, when lasagna is made with more humility. You chuckle to yourself. Somewhere, culinary scholar is sweating under fluorescent lights in a university archive trying to decipher 14th century pasta etiquette, while here a spoon with one eye and a chip on her shoulder still commands respect over dough. At the back of the pantry, you find a tiny shelf marked Skelettian, little schoolgirls. These are training spoons, smaller, lighter, often used by apprentices learning to master pasta stirring without destroying everything in the pot. Most are carved with nicknames like Buffetta, Zizola, or Maggiorina. These were practice spoons, and using them badly earned you kitchen lashes. Not literal ones, just sharp remarks and passive-aggressive sighs from older aunts. One particularly strange spoon catches your eye. Its name, L'Orecchio di San Guido's ear. It's shaped exactly like an orecchietta pasta piece, and was supposedly blessed by a priest who mistook it for a relic. Whether that's true is up for debate. Historians roll their eyes at this one. But locals insist the spoon sings when stirred in garlic water, another quirk. Some of these pasta spoons have drilled holes not for draining, but as a kind of code. 3 holes for wheat pasta, 4 for chestnut flour, 2 and a nick for emergency polenta substitution. There are even stories of spoons being encoded with family pasta recipes. One dent meant, add more pepper. Another notch meant, don't forget the sheep's milk. We'd call it overkill. They called it lunch. Of course, some spoon-naming purists hated the whole idea. A 1319 letter from a Tuscan kitchen steward complains, the girls name their spoons like pets, then weep when they burn. I told them, it's a tool, not a harsh words, especially since the letter ends with a postscript. Please send more pine nuts. The garlic spoon cried again. By now you're sitting cross-legged on the pantry floor. These pasta relics spread before you like tiny wooden soldiers. Some curved, some chipped, some blessed, some cursed. All of them with history tucked inside their tiny grain. You get the feeling they've seen it all wars, weddings, famine, and feasts. And yet here they are, waiting quietly for someone to boil water and summon them back to life. The wind whistles outside. A cat knocks something off a shelf. You stay still. In a kitchen like this, even silence has seasoning. You rise slowly from the pantry floor, brushing a little flour dust off your knees, and pad back into the main kitchen. The fire's coals glow now like lazy rubies, and the night has taken on that particular hush when even the walls seem to listen. On the far wall, beside the window, warped with centuries of breeze and gossip, hangs a wooden rack shaped like a ladder. It's the Daily Ladder, or at least that's what someone scrawled above it in faded ink. On each rung, spaced with a precision that feels both loving and slightly obsessive, hangs a single spoon labeled for a day of the week. Yes, they had weak spoons. You step closer. The topmost spoon is labeled Dominicina for Sunday, then Lunedetta, Martellina, and so on. 7 spoons for 7 days, each with its own quirks, carved variations, and unsurprisingly its own set of rules. These weren't decorative. They were meant for specific meals, specific ingredients, and specific moods. You think of them like a weekly planner, except instead of color-coded tabs, they used egg stains and prayer beads. Sunday's Dominicina is the most ornate. Wide bowl, flared handle, faint gold leafing at the tiplong since worn away, except for a single stubborn patch. This was the family spoon for the big midday meal, often the only time during the week everyone would be seated together. It stirred the Sunday broth, a beefy, vegetable-rich elixir, often made with ingredients saved all week. The spoon's name, a diminutive of Dimenica, makes it sound sweet, like a child's nickname. But make no mistake, this was the matriarch of the set. If it cracked, the cook cried. If it splintered, someone fasted. If it vanished, they blamed the neighbors. A mainstream historical fact? Many medieval Italian families had designated days for certain meals. Friday for fish, Sunday for meat if you could afford it, Wednesday for lentils and regret. Some wealthier households matched utensils to this schedule, carving or marking them accordingly. It helped organize the kitchen, but also reinforced the rhythm of life. Time passed not just in prayers or harvests, but in spoons. Monday's spoon, Lunedetta, is a sleepy-looking thing. Narrow, slightly warped, probably from stirring thick porridge over a fire that was never quite hot enough. The name feels affectionate, like a weary nod to the day after rest. Historians still debate whether weekday spoons were individualized per household, or if there was a broader cultural movement, possibly driven by monastic influences where daily routine was sacred. Either way, Lunetta looks like she has seen too many undercooked beans. Tuesdays, Martellina is heavier. It has a thicker shaft and a blunt end. Not quite a spatula, not quite a spoon. It was used for smashing chickpeas and stirring onion stew, both known for testing a cook's patience. Some say it got its name from martello, meaning hammer. Others argue it was named after a grumpy uncle called Martello, who always banged it on the pot when annoyed. The truth is lost to time, but the spoon still carries the faint dent of someone smacking it on copper with theatrical flair. You spot Wednesday's Mercolina, delicately carved with a spiral handle. Supposedly it was used for fasting soups, brothy, thin, usually forgettable. The spoon has a sad elegance, like it dreams of stirring something fancier, but knows its place. There's even a chipped corner, possibly from trying to scrape one last turnip from the pot. Families were often required to fast during religious observances, and utensils like Mercolina became part of that quiet discipline. No rich sauces, no indulgent meats, just water, herbs, and the sigh of surrender. Thursdays, Giovanetta is cheeky. Small, with a curled tip and a stubby handle, it was used for tasting sauces. Not serving just tasting. According to family legend, this spoon never made it to the table, because someone always used it too soon, too often, and too boldly. One account from 1338 describes a scandal in which a daughter-in-law was caught licking Giovanetta before Mass. I was made to apologize to the spoon. That's right, not to her elders. To the spoon. The priest witnessed it. It was a whole thing. Friday brings Venerina, long-handled and deeply bowed. Perfect for fish stew. There's a little fish carved at the top. Not anatomically correct, but you get the idea. Friday was the day of abstinence, when meat was forbidden, and seafood, if available, was the star. But not too flavorful. This was still meant to be humble. Venerina carried the weight of balancing devotion with sustenance, a tightrope walked by countless cooks who feared oversalting their souls. Saturday's Sabatina is utilitarian, blunt, flat, with burn marks at the base. She's the cleanup crew. Used for scraping, stirring leftovers, thickening old stews into new ones. The name sounds sweet, but she's the spoon that reminds you tomorrow's broth starts tonight. You can almost hear the voice of a grandmother muttering. Clean the pot with Sabatina, so Dominicina doesn't taste like Friday's fish. You run your fingers down the ladder rack, feeling the dents, the rubs, the heat-polished smoothness of 1,000 anxious breakfasts. These weren't just utensils. They were a schedule, a morality, a calendar of flavors and chores. And yes, a passive-aggressive weekly commentary from the kitchen gods. Because if Martellino was still sticky on Wednesday, someone was definitely getting side-eyed during evening prayers. There's a smaller rung beneath the main ladder, a bonus spoon. No name carved in wood, but a faded piece of parchment tucked beside it, labeled simply, Quando nulla funziona, when nothing works. The spoon, completely blackened, warped into a twist, the bowl chipped like a tooth. This was the emergency spoon. The one you reached for when the broth burned, the garlic rotted, the in-laws showed up early, or the cat fell in the flour again. It's barely a spoon at all. But it exists. It's not because it succeeded, but because it survived. Historians still argue whether this kind of culinary scheduling helped or hindered creativity. Some say it enforced mindfulness each day with its own flavor, its own rule, its own quiet dignity. Others argue it created culinary monotony, a tyranny of the ladle. But you just see it as oddly comforting. It's like knowing Tuesday always tastes like garlic and crushed dreams. You climb to your feet again. Fire's almost out now, its glow barely reaching the ladder rack. But each spoon seems to hold its own soft light, reflected in memory and touch, in the way the kitchen remembers your hands, even when they tremble. 1 week, 7 spoons, a rhythm of hunger and hope carved into olive wood and ash, and a bonus spoon in case everything falls apart. You ease away from the daily ladder, stepping softly over a creaky floorboard that coughs like an old uncle with secrets. The kitchen is deeper than you thought, somehow bigger in the quiet end as your eyes adjust. You spot a low drawer, wide and slightly crooked, its iron handle shiny from centuries of nervous tugs. It's labeled in faint ink, Lascarbate, the rude ones. You already know this drawer is going to be good. Pull it open slowly. Inside, nestled in linen scraps and old garlic skins, are spoons that were clearly not invited to formal dinners. Their handles are warped, their bowls asymmetrical, and their wood is often darker than the rest, probably from fire damage, furious stews, or simply a lack of care. Each one is etched with a name that feels, well, suspiciously insulting. Here's Skukia, roughly meaning chatterbox. Ch. Her bowl is dented at an angle, like she's whispering to the broth instead of stirring it. Then Gaffa, the clumsy one, all sharp curves and no balance. And Squatterella, a name once given to lowly scullery maids, it translates, not delicately, as little drudge. You pick her up. She's featherlight, as if hollowed from inside by exhaustion alone. These are the spoons no one brags about, but they're the ones who do the dirty work. One historical fact that still makes food historians grin is this. Despite how refined Italian food culture became, medieval kitchens were chaotic, loud, and profoundly hierarchical. The head cook was often barely literate, but had the memory of a war general. Below them, a fleet of helpers stirred, tasted, chopped, cleaned, and dodged insults from the noble family upstairs. These rude spoons were the ones left in the bottom of the pot too long, used to scrape burned bits, or wielded to scare off rats. Some had nails hammered into the ends. Others were wrapped in string where they'd cracked and been healed. Skukia is especially tragic, according to a story etched on her handle in jagged script. Parlava troppo I cadnel brodo. She talked too much and fell into the broth, since the spoon's fate tore the cooks. You may never know. One particularly offensive spoon is simply called bruta, ugly. It's been burned, chopped, possibly chewed on, and someone has nailed a coin to the back of its bowl. Why, historians still argue whether this was a superstition to ward off bad luck or a punishment for the spoon stealing flavor from the stew. Either way, Bruta earned her place in this shame drawer. And yet, you get the sense that Lascarbate weren't exactly failures. They were survivors. The ones who bore the brunt of kitchen disasters. When the cream curdled, or the stock boiled over, or a chicken turned out to be mostly feathers, these were the spoons thrown across the room, then quietly retrieved and put back to work.
Ow.
Not out of affection, but because they were simply too useful to die. A spoon named Tignosa, which roughly translates to scabby, still has a stain like a birthmark running along its handle. The rumor goes she was once dropped into a pot of hot fat and came out discolored but wiser. Her new nickname stuck. Now she's the frying spoon. And no one, not even the most superstitious aunt, dares cook fritters without her. She's considered lucky in a twisted, crispy kind of way. There's also La Succhia Brodo, the broth sucker. This one is weirdly tiny, barely larger than a thimble, yet clearly used often. It's meant to steal a taste of broth without anyone noticing. You chuckle. Kitchen espionage existed long before microwave ovens and midnight snacks. In some families, spoons like this had secret hiding places above the hearth or under the salt, generally accessible to the cook. The eldest daughter or the most daring cousin, and then you find the smallest spoon of all. It's not even carved. It's just a splinter of wood, hastily shaved into a scoop, barely larger than a bean. Tied to it with a loop of linen is a faded scrap of parchment that reads, "Per quando la parole sono finite." When words have run out, you hold it. Don't know what it stirred or when. Maybe it was used during a death vigil, be a failed courtship. Maybe when the soup burned and no one had the courage to speak. A spoon for silence, spoon for endings. Quirky detail. In some northern Italian regions, particularly in rural Lombardy, it was customary to gift a shame spoon to a newlywed bride, not to insult her, but to acknowledge that disaster would inevitably strike. "Here's the spoon you'll use when you ruin dinner," they'd say, smiling kindly. "Because one day you will ruin dinner. And then you'll laugh. Eventually, you imagine some young bride, tears in her eyes, burning her first tomato sauce, and then reaching for gaffa or bruta with a muttered curse. The spoon doesn't judge. It's been there before. Scholars still debate whether these spoon namings were functional, symbolic, or just emotional venting. Did cooks believe the utensils held personality, or was it just a way to turn drudgery into story? One theory even suggests that naming a spoon helped externalize blame the stew didn't burn. Pipistrella overdid it again. And honestly, that tracks. You gently place the spoons back in the drawer, making sure Scacchia doesn't lie too close to La Succhia Brodo. They probably still have issues. Then you ease the drawer closed, hearing the faint rustle of cloth and old garlic skins as it shuts. In this kitchen, shame isn't hidden. It's carved, scorched, and named, but also forgiven. You lean against the counter and think, it's comforting in a way, that even your mistakes can become legend if you just give them a name and a drawer to sleep in. You've seen the weekly spoons, the noble ones. You've rifled through the drawer of disgrace, where every burn and crack has a name and a story. But now, your gaze shifts upward above the hearth, where the ceiling is low and the shadows thick. There's a shelf there, dusty and solemn, lined with spoons that don't gleam or crook or flake with garlic oil. These are long, bone-thin, and they shimmer faintly in the firelight. Not because they're polished, but because they haven't been touched in decades. A carved wooden sign dangles from a rusty nail, per chi non torna, for those who don't return. This is the memorial row. 7 spoons, each one carved with a name, a date, and a little cymbalan almond, a bell, a feather, a tiny lute. You know instantly these are the spoons of people who never came back. Sons lost to war, daughters gone to childbirth, lovers taken by the plague. Each spoon belonged to someone who stirred, served, or simply tasted from this hearth, and then didn't come back for supper. You reach for one, smoother than it looks, the grain rubbed down by the same hands that probably braided onions and cut herbs in silence. Her name is Lucetta, and she has a feather carved into her handle. The year 1348. That's not just any year. That's the year, the Black Death. She was probably one of the many who caught it. Maybe after tending to a neighbor or sneaking a spoonful of stew to a child in quarantine. The feather. Maybe she loved birds. Or maybe she just left the world too quickly, like flight. Mainstream fact. In 14th century Italy, entire households were wiped out by plague waves. Some kitchens, scholars say, were left completely untouched for months, as if waiting for laughter to return. It was common to mark personal items as memorials, brushes, belts, ladles. Even choose quiet shrines to people whose graves were never properly dug. Lucetta's spoon is not broken. It's perfect, preserved. You get the sense no one dared use it again, as if the memory might burn the soup. Next to hers is Alberico's, with a lute carved at the handle. The year 1352. The lute suggests he may have been a musician or Maybe he just whistled too much in the kitchen. A note has been tucked behind the spoon, brittle with age but still legible. Cantava mentre toglieva la sapole. He sang while cutting onions. That was his thing. You wonder if someone found the silence afterward unbearable? One spoon is thicker, heavier, almost like a small paddle. It belonged to Nonna Fiora, 1317, marked with an almond. The family believed almonds kept the mind sharp, and Fiora was known for memorizing long, boring prayers while stirring. Not surprisingly, her spoon is long enough to keep a child at arm's length. It has weight, authority. You get the sense even the stew wouldn't dare boil over when she stirred. Then there's Tommaso, 1329. His spoon is chipped, uneven, clearly used for rough tasks. It has a bell carved at the end. Scholars still argue whether bell symbols were linked to illness or joy. In this case, perhaps both. A story you overhear in the quiet of your own thoughts suggests he died on the eve of his own wedding, and his bride refused to eat again without lighting a candle near his spoon. You don't know whether it's true, but the spoon feels heavier than it should. Quirky bit. Some medieval families had mourning spoons set aside for funerals. During a wake, a single spoon was passed between guests to stir the remembrance pot, usually a thin, tasteless broth. Not to nourish the body, but to give the mouth something to do while grief did the talking. Some spoons still carry traces of black dye at their ends, or ash rubbed into their bowls. There's a baby spoon. You didn't expect that. It's a tiny, rounded, barely larger than a thumb. The name is Leola, and there's no date, just a little flower carved on the handle. You feel a lump rise in your throat as you imagine someone crafting this by candlelight, hoping to feed porridge to a child who never quite got to eat it. You gently put it back. The last spoon is unmarked. It's simply ... there. Worn, pale, anonymous. Maybe it belonged to someone never named or someone whose name was too painful to carve. Historians still debate the presence of anonymous spoons in kitchens like these. Some argue they were practical extras. Others insist they were intentional placeholders for future loss. Sorrow anticipated, sorrow preassigned. You find that hard to wrap your head around. And yet, you understand it. You realize you've been holding your breath. The silence around these spoons is different from the kitchen's other hushes. It's sacred. Even the fire crackles more softly here. And you wonder, what does it mean to grieve with wood? To let a shape stand in for a voice that's gone? These spoons were not burned, not buried. They were saved, held, remembered. The medieval world may have lacked antibiotics, but it didn't lack ritual or reverence. You step back, almost bowing without realizing. The memorial row glows faintly in the firelight, and for a moment you see, not spoons, but people. Faces, fingers, voices, some sharp, some soft. They live in these curved slivers of ash wood and olive root. They speak when the broth stirs. They return, if only in memory. Every time someone reaches for the shelf and whispers, "I'll use Lucetta's, just this once." But no one ever does. You turn back to the hearth, the heat on your face now gently fading. And for the first time tonight, the kitchen doesn't feel sleepy. It feels eternal. You leave the memorial row behind, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the silence it draped over your shoulders like a shawl. But now you notice something strange. Along the back wall, behind the flour bins and hanging garlic braids, is a tiny door, no taller than your hip, with a heavy latch and a carved handle shaped like a curled cat. You kneel and open it, half expecting a mouse, or maybe a very small nun with strong opinions about soup. Instead, you find a box. It's lacquered black, nearly invisible in the shadow, and sealed with a strip of aged red wax. The words stamped into the lid say, "AI Soli Degni." To the worthy only. Of course it does. Of course this box holds secrets. You break the seal with a quiet snap, and the smell that drifts out is strange clove. Ink, lemon peel, and something sharp, like vinegar-soaked paper. Inside, nestled in embroidered velvet, lie 5 spoons that look nothing like the others. These are the forgery spoons. The first one you pick up isn't even wood, it's tin, poorly disguised with a walnut-stained handle. And written down its spine in medieval Tuscan script are the words per L, Braulio del. For Thursday, S. Deception. You blink. Welcome to the fine art of culinary fraud. Historical fact, 14th century Italy. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was reputation. And reputation was everything. If you couldn't afford a real almond paste or a delicate rabbit ragout, you learned to fake it. Entire cookbooks were written on how to make cheap dishes taste expensive. The right spoon could help a lie pass for a delicacy. This tin spoon was used to stir fake almond milk, made from breadcrumbs, rose water, and ground fava beans. It even had a trick handle to mask the unpleasant aroma. Slip a lemon peel into the hollow handle, and instant nobility. It's the medieval version of adding gold leaf to a boxed cake mix and calling it artisan. You chuckle, then gasp softly as you lift the next spoon, silver-plated, curved like a tusk, with one half of the bowl warped inward like a small ladle. This one's a misdirection spoon. You notice the bottom is flat, perfect for pressing air bubbles into thick sauce, not to help it cook, but to simulate richness. The more bubbles, the more fat it appeared to contain. Guests saw it and assumed duck fat, veal stock, even truffle oil. In truth, mostly boiled turnips and guesswork. Small scroll tucked beside this spoon explains its purpose. Per il Banchetto del Vescovo, for the bishop's banquet. The record shows the family hosting the dinner was deep in debt, but desperate to appear prosperous. So they served duck lentil stew made from seasoned cabbage and flavored with pork grease rubbed onto the bowl with a rag. The spoon did the rest, flicking just enough oil from the surface to give the illusion of abundance. Quirky detail. Historians have found spoon molds from the late 1200s with removable tips. Why? Because the cook could unscrew the flavored end and soak it in spice tinctures, allowing the spoon itself to alter the taste of anything it touched. Nutmeg spoons. Vinegar spoons. Even meat spoons coated in beef marrow for lentil stews during lean months. The spoon didn't just stir, it cheated. The third spoon in the box is wood, but carved in perfect symmetry, a little too perfect. Its handle is grooved like a ruler, and near the top is a series of notches. Realize this is a portion illusion spoon designed to look identical to its siblings, but deliver only 2/3 of the volume. It helps stretch a small amount of stew across more bowls without arousing suspicion. A poor family could serve 12 guests with the food meant for 8, and still seem generous. Scholars still argue whether these spoons were clever household tools or outright deception. Was it survival or scandal? Some accounts accuse entire convents of using these spoons during royal visits, only to be caught when the visiting cardinal asked for seconds and was met with frantic silence. You reach for the fourth. This one is bone, light, nearly translucent, and it's blank. No carvings, no inscription. But when you turn it in the firelight, you see something faint. So faint, you're not sure it's real. A watermark in the grain. The faint outline of a wolf's paw. You pause. In medieval Tuscany, the wolf was a symbol of cunning, but also protection. Families facing famine would sometimes designate a lupa spoon, reserved only for the head cook, the one person tasked with flavoring food without wasting a scrap. This spoon was considered sacred. No one else could touch it. If they did, the stew would fail. Every time you smile, whether true or not, you're starting to understand. The spoons weren't just utensils, they were co-conspirators, magic wands, secret keepers. The last spoon in the box is entirely wrapped in linen. Carefully, reverently, you unwrap it with slow hands. And what emerges is both plain and dazzling. A perfectly balanced olive wood spoon, completely unmarked, except for a tiny brass pin set into its neck. This is the witness spoon. Used only once, ever, during legal kitchen disputes. Yes, that was a thing. Mainstream history agrees. In larger households, cooks could be accused of theft, sabotage, or waste. When someone was accused of stealing fat or burning the bishop's soup on purpose, a witness spoon was brought to court, yes. An actual courtroom and held up as part of the evidence. Some spoons were even sworn in under oath, touched by both parties, then stored forever, never used again. This spoon probably sat through a trial. Probably helped exonerate a doom, a very nervous kitchen maid. You suddenly feel a little nervous holding it. You wrap it back in the linen. And yet, through all the trickery, there's something oddly comforting about these spoons. They weren't evil. They weren't malicious. They were tools of survival. In a world where your soup pot was also your bank account, your guest list could be fatal. Your status depended on how creamy your chickpeas looked, A little spoon lie here and there was not just understandable, what it was expected. You slide the spoons back into their box gently. You replace the wax with a soft press of your thumb, the seal incomplete but meaningful. The cat-handled door creaks closed behind you. In a kitchen that holds your shame, your grief, and your daily rituals, it somehow makes perfect sense that there's also room for your cleverness, your little cheats, your hopes of passing something off as better than it really is. Because sometimes survival looks like a wooden spoon dipped in vinegar and lies. The air in the kitchen feels different now. Maybe it's the sharp scent of vinegar still clinging to your fingertips from those spoons of deception. Or maybe it's something else, the weight of understanding that even in a pot of lies, someone still had to stir, still had to taste. And now, as the fire cracks low and amber shadows flicker across the stone walls, you notice a curious row of narrow cubbies built into the bricks behind the hearth. Each one just wide enough to hold a spoon, and each with a neat little parchment label. At first, you assume this is some sort of storage system. But none of the spoons here look used. Their bowls are clean, their handles gleam, and their labels. They don't say things like stirring or serving. They say things like La Confession and Il Segreto del Sepol. The confession. The secret of the onions. You have stumbled into the poetic spoons. These weren't used for cooking at all. These were symbolic like prayer beads for the kitchen bound. Each one connected to an emotion, a memory, or a moment of ritual. When this household, or one just like it, a spoon wasn't just a tool, it was a diary entry with a handle. Take Il Rimpianto, regret. The spoon is plain, but the bowl is unusually deep. Almost like a ladle, but not quite. A small groove runs down the center, suggesting that anything you lifted with it would slowly, inevitably, pour out again. Beautiful design. Awful for stew. Perfect for morning. Mainstream fact, in some Italian households, particularly those influenced by early monastic traditions, it was customary for women to perform small rituals in the kitchen tied to personal events, a miscarriage, a betrayal, the memory of a dead brother. These rituals weren't sanctioned by the church, of course, but they flourished nonetheless. A specific spoon, never used for food, might be stirred through water, herbs, or even ashes while reciting a silent confession. A sort of domestic exorcism. You wouldn't find it in scripture, but you'd find it in the pantry. One spoon is carved entirely in spirals. No flat edge, no straight line. Its label reads Il Malinteso, the misunderstanding. You get the sense this spoon was stirred when arguments boiled over, when brothers stopped speaking, or when someone burned the bread and swore it wasn't their fault. And then there's L'Esperanza. Hope. A spoon with a handle made from two types of wood, fused together olive and chestnut. Each side has a different scent, a different feel. Quirky aside. There are tales from the Apennine foothills about women who would write letters using spoons, literally carving notches, patterns and tiny symbols into blank spoons to convey things they couldn't say aloud. When a neighbor or friend visited, they'd be given tea stirred with the spoon. If the message was received, the spoon would be passed back upside down. Gossip, grief, or forgiveness all. In the swirl of a spoon, call it the medieval dims. You spot one labeled Il Perdono, forgiveness. It's curved forward in a way that makes it almost impractical to use, like it always leans toward the bowl. The wood is pale and soft birch, perhaps, forgiving grain, easy to carve and easy to burn. The most arresting spoon you see is labeled "Il my ditto." It's the never said. This one is dark, heavy, the bowl is sealed. It's literally sealed shut with wax. You stare. Why would you make a spoon that cannot scoop, that cannot taste? And the answer floats into your brain with all the quietness of dusk, because some things aren't even meant to be said or stirred or swallowed. Some truths aren't edible. You remember that feeling of holding a secret so sharp it might burn your tongue? You imagine someone kneeling by this hearth, cradling that sealed spoon, whispering something only the fire heard, and suddenly you feel very, very still. You slide the spoon back into its cubby. There are over 24 of them here, labeled and stored like letters in a library, each one heavy with unspoken things. You wonder how many nights someone in this house came down alone, when the rest were sleeping, and reached for the confession. Not to cook, just to hold, just to say, "I know, I remember." A quiet kind of therapy, centuries before anyone thought to charge for it. You sit for a moment in front of these spoons. You can't help it. The fire's heat is now softer, more like a memory than a blaze. You think of your own kitchen drawer. Bent forks, rusted cheese graters. A takeout menu wedged behind a spatula. You wonder, what if they meant more? What if every tool was tied to a thought you couldn't quite say out loud? You're not sleepy yet, but your muscles are heavy, as if weighed down by centuries of grief and longing in little wooden metaphors. And so you rise slowly and whisper thanks to the poetic spoons, not out of superstition, but out of shared understanding, because some things aren't for eating, some things are for remembering. You drift, no, not walking, exactly, just ... gliding further into the kitchen's memoryscape, where the air grows warmer and the walls seem to pulse with quiet breath. Somewhere behind you, the poetic spoons continue to dream their little wooden dreams. Now, though, you find yourself in the pantry, or what's left of it. A narrow hallway lined with crooked shelves, stuffed with jars of dried chickpeas, bulbs of garlic plaited into old braids, and mysterious sacks labeled only with fading ink. In the very center of it all, a rack of identical spoons. Dozens, possibly hundreds, same size, same shape, same dull finish. Until you squint and realize each one is numbered. Welcome to the inventory spoons. These weren't used for stirring. They weren't secretive or sentimental. They were practical, relentlessly boringly practical. Which, ironically, made them one of the most important sets in the house. Mainstream fact? In large households, especially monastic kitchens or merchant estates pantries, were tightly managed. Every dried lentil, every pinch of imported saffron had to be counted, recorded, justified. Before modern measuring cups or digital scales, they relied on calibrated spoons like these, carefully carved to match a specific weight or volume. Some even came with miniature certificates tied on with twine. 1 spoon equals 12 dried fava beans. No more, no less. You pick up spoon number 47. It's a little heavier than it looks, carved from dense perwood. The handle has been worn to a dull sheen by years of identical gestures. Stir, tap, shake, repeat, and beside it. Spoon number 48, identical but with a hair more curve in the bowl. The label reads, 4 soaked grains only, non-compliant if dry. You have officially reached peak bureaucracy. But not all of these spoons were equal. One entire row seems to belong to a woman named Marta, her name etched softly into the back of each one, always followed by the word controlata. Verified. These were her spoons. Her job. You imagine her now? Sleeves rolled, a sharp eye on the salt jar, tapping spoon after spoon into labeled pouches. Maybe she was feared. Maybe she was invisible. But her hands were law. Quirky detail. In some wealthier kitchens, the inventory spoons were kept under literal lock and key hung on pegs, inside a cupboard that required 2 keys, held by different people, just like a bank vault. 1 key for the steward, 1 for the head cook. This meant no single person could alter the kitchen's contents without a witness. Stirring the soup? Free game, measuring the raisins? High security? You find 1 spoon that breaks the pattern. It's bright green, but naturally it's been painted badly. The number's been scratched off, and someone's written Nesino in shaky hand. No one. The bowl has been slightly burned, as if someone tried to destroy it and failed halfway. This was the ghost spoon. The one you used when the count didn't quite add up. You know the drill. A few missing almonds here. A spoonful too many of sugar there. Instead of adjusting the records, you'd use Nasuno. The phantom spoon. The spoon that never existed. Historians still argue whether these phantom spoons were a recognized loophole or an underground trick. Some suggest kitchen staff had a gray market of missing quantities and secret barters. All trace back to ghost spoons like this one. Others argue it's more folklore than fact. But this one definitely existed, and someone clearly hoped you wouldn't find it. You'll hang it back up, carefully. You wonder what punishments awaited a pantry worker who miscounted intentionally. Were they reassigned? Fined, whipped with a fennel stalk? The records are vague, deliberately vague. Probably. But there are stories of spoon audits so stressful they caused fainting. Yes, fainting. From spoons. And it wasn't just about food. One row of inventory spoons is marked with dyed string green, red, blue. These were for dye powders, used to color cheese, bread, or even pasta. In a time before food labels, appearance meant everything. A loaf of golden saffron bread might actually contain just a pinch of turmeric. You'd better measure that turmeric with exactly spoon number 22, lest the abbess accuse you of lying. There's a shelf labeled liquidi, sospetti. Suspicious liquids. You really shouldn't, but you peek. The jar smells faintly of ammonia and wine vinegar. Likely some long-evaporated tincture. The spoon attached to this shelf is metal, small, and rusted at the tip. You assume it once measured a medicinal syrup. Or maybe poison. Who can say? You notice the spoons are arranged in a patterness, ascending, descending, grouped by category. Almost like a language. This was someone's alphabet. Someone's system of truth. Spoon 12 tells spoon 13 what happened to the dried mushrooms. Spoon 14 clears spoon 9 of theft charges. It's not inventory, it's storytelling in a language only the pantry could understand. Then, tucked under a woven cloth, you find a record book. The ink has faded, the page is warped with time, but inside each day has its tally. Spices drawn, grains used, oils dispensed, and beside each line, a spoon number. Thursday, spoon 45 to 2 scoops. Lentil spoon 45 to 1 scoop. Again note. Question cook, she wept. It's all here. Drama, suspicion, bureaucracy. In lentil ink. You sit back on your heels and sigh, 'cause somehow you get it. The monotony, the order. The odd satisfaction of knowing exactly how much cumin was used last Pentecost. You didn't expect to bond with an ancient pantry auditor named Marta, but you do. You can picture her so clearly now, her sighs, her aching back, her fierce sense of justice. Maybe no one remembered her name. Maybe her legacy is just a few worn spoons. But they counted, and so did she. The door to the pantry swings shut behind you with the softest creak, as if even the hinges are too exhausted to protest. The smell of dried legumes and vinegar inventory trails behind you, like a ghost with a clipboard. Stretch your shoulders. Somehow feel like they've aged several decades under the weight of Marta-esque spoon-counting legacy. But just as you think you've seen every possible iteration of spoon-based civilization, you round a dim corner and find yourself in a much grander space. A long table dominates the room, flanked by carved wooden benches. The hearth here is taller, the ceiling vaulted and heavy with soot, and the shelves. Well, the shelves are gorgeous. These are not pantry shelves. These are display shelves. Lined along them, like royalty at court, are the ceremonial spoons. At first glance, they're impractical. Most are too long, too ornate, too delicate. One is carved entirely from bone and inlaid with blue glass. Another has a twisted handle ending in a tiny, perfect brass lion's head. These spoons weren't used for cooking. They were for occasions. Celebrations, status, theater. Mainstream fact. In medieval Italy, especially among noble families and wealthy merchant households, presentation was everything. A dish wasn't just cooked, it was unveiled. And often, that reveal was accompanied by a spoon meant to awe, not to stir. A spoon made of silver, perhaps, or mother of pearl's handle, inscribed with a family crest or a devotional phrase. You pick up one labeled Sposalizio. Wedding. The spoon is wide, flat, and almost fan-like. Clearly designed not to serve food, but to scatter flower petals or maybe sugared almonds over a bride's procession. Historians believe such spoons were sometimes used in pre-wedding rituals, like blessing the ingredients for a symbolic dish the couple would share. Love measured in heaping spoonfuls. There's another. Battesimo. Baptism. This one is narrow and cup-like, with a cross etched into the handle, likely used to anoint the baby with olive oil. Not a drop wasted. Then perdonanza. The spoon of forgiveness. It's shaped like a tear, smooth and thin, as if designed to catch something falling rather than serve anything at all. It could never hold food just a moment. And returno. Perhaps the most ornate. It's gold-plated, with miniature carvings of ships along the edge. You can almost hear the echo of cheers from a feast where someone believed dead came home. A spoon to serve the soup of resurrection. Quirky tidbit. Some of these ceremonial spoons had verses inscribed along the bowl in minuscule script. Not Latin versus personal lines. Blessings, jokes, even flirtations. One particularly scandalous example from Florence reads, "If you steal this spoon, may your meat always be dry." A medieval roast, in both senses. You find one that makes you pause. Ultima Cena, the Last Supper. Not that Last Supper. This was used at funerals to serve a final symbolic meal, usually broth or soaked bread on behalf of the deceased. One spoonful per mourner, eaten in silence. Spoon here is ebony, matte, and heavy, with no adornments. It's just a notch on the handle, perhaps for each use. Historians still argue whether these funeral spoons were widely used or just a local tradition. Some say they began in Umbria. Others swear by their Ligurian origins. There's even one theory that they started in secret heretical sects where meals stood in for communion, but most agree. By the 1400s, ceremonial spoons were an established part of life's milestones. As you move further along the shelf, the designs grow increasingly impractical. There's a spoon made entirely of coral, another with feathers wired into the handle, one that jingles faintly when you move it thanks to 3 tiny bells attached to its base. You have to wonder what these were for. Then you find a note written in careful old Italian. Per la farsa. For the farce, of course. Some ceremonial spoons weren't serious at all. They were jokes, gags, props for plays, parties, or public feasts. A noble might be served soup with a comically long spoon requiring the help of a squire. A bride might pretend to drop her silver spoon only for it to break apart into petals. Humor, after all, was another form of ceremony. And yet, even in jest, the spoon remained central. Because in a world where table settings were often literal seating charts of power, even a silly spoon could send a message. We have so much silver, we made this one unusable on purpose. You spot a series of smaller spoons marked piccoli onor, small honors. These were likely gift tokens offered after a job well done or a favor returned. Not meant for use, it's meant for remembrance. One bears a carved olive branch on the bowl and the phrase, sempre calma, always calm. Another says simply, per il silenzio, for silence. These were spoons not to stir, not to measure, but to mean. A servant might tuck it into their belongings after years of loyal service. A friend might offer it during a parting meal. It was the kind of object no one would melt down or throw away, not because of what it was made of, but because of what it meant. You feel, suddenly, like a guest at a banquet that ended centuries ago. The chairs are gone, the soup is cold, but the spoons remember. And they're still here waiting on the shelf, because no one had the heart to pack them away. You sit on the bench and run your fingers along the edge of the table. The wood is scarred cut and burned and smoothed again by countless elbows, countless stories. And in this room you realize spoons were the punctuation. The laughter at a wedding. The tears at a funeral. The polite tapping of a gift spoon against a goblet. Even silence had its spoon. You want to laugh or cry? Or maybe just find your way back to the present, but not yet. Because behind you, you hear a drawer slide open on its own. And you know with the same certainty you feel in your chest when you look at a full moon or a child sleeping, that the next set of spoons has something very strange to show you. You turn slowly. Because honestly at this point, when an ancient spoon drawer slides open by itself, you don't rush toward it. You give it a moment. You let it think about its life choices. But the drawer waits, open-mouthed and patient, revealing a velvet-lined tray of spoons so peculiar, so personal, they practically hum with secrets. These are the intimate spoons. They don't announce themselves. No nameplates, no dramatic handles, just subtle irregularities. Slightly smaller, slightly smoother, slightly tender. These were the spoons people didn't share. The ones they hid in drawers or tucked into pockets. The ones with stories too soft to be listed in any household inventory. The first one you lift is curved, not bent, curved. Like it was designed to hug the inside of a small bowl. Or maybe a palm. The grain in the wood is silky with use, the handle slightly off-center. Someone carved this by hand. Slowly, maybe nervously. This was not a factory spoon. It was made for one specific mouth. It's a mainstream fact. Personal spoons weren't uncommon in medieval Italy, especially in rural areas or among lower-ranking clergy. A person might carry their own eating spoon on their belt, in a cloth pouch, or even around their neck. Communal dining was standard, but everyone wanted to know where their lips had been. Thank you very much. You find another spoon, this one thinner and long-handled, with a rough notch carved on one side. But then you notice a pattern for notches, evenly spaced. A quiet record, perhaps of prayers said, or weeks survived, or lovers kissed. You'll never know, but someone once did. There's a small, heart-shaped tin beside it. Inside, a spoon the size of your thumbnail, useless for soup, perfect for mischief. The initials G plus M are scratched into the back. A love spoon. In some towns, giving someone a hand-carved spoon was a courtship gesture. Sweet, private, intimate. Like a promise you could stir tea with. Quirky tidbit. In some remote Italian villages, teenage couples used spoon codes to flirt secretly during communal meals. Passing a spoon handle first was an invitation. Bowl first meant no thanks. Placing your spoon upside down next to their plate, a polite rejection, cold but efficient. You find one with a hollow handle. A tiny cork seals the end. You remove it carefully and peek inside. A rolled scrap of parchment. The ink's almost gone, but you can make out the words non dire, Anesino, ja. Tell no one. The spoon is otherwise plain. Somehow that makes it feel even more charged. This was a message spoon, a secret carrier. Whether it held gossip, smuggled salt, or forbidden recipes, who can say? Historians still argue whether such hidden compartment spoons were common practice or more the stuff of legend. Some claim they were used by kitchen spies and noble court servants paid to overhear and report. Others suggest they were used by apothecaries to transport tiny doses of medicine or poison. Again, who's to say? You find a set of 3, bound together with a threadbare ribbon. Each is carved from a different fruitwood pear, cherry, and fig. The handles are marked with numbers, but not sequentially. 3, 7, 11. Prime numbers. Magical numbers, in some beliefs. These were probably blessing spoons, used to stir ritual foods during specific feast days or lunar cycles. Not for the public, but for family or faith. Stir once for health, twice for memory, 3 times for protection. Whether it worked or not didn't matter. What mattered was who stirred and how. You're halfway through the drawer now, and you spot something that stops you. It's a spoon butt, barely. More like a sliver of metal, shaped like a spoon but twisted at the tip. The handle is ringed with bite marks. You're not judging. You've chewed a pencil or two in your time, but this was a stress spoon. Someone chewed this through every bad night in the kitchen. Maybe it lived under their apron. Maybe they bit it when the sauce curdled. Maybe it was their only way to keep from screaming. You run your thumb along the teeth grooves. They are oddly comforting, a spoon with scars. There's one final item in the drawer. It's wrapped in cloth. Linen frayed, slightly scented lavender. Maybe no label, no note. Inside is a spoon carved from dark walnut, its handle long and looping like a question mark. Along its neck a carved phrase. Quando il brodo consola, when the broth comforts. It doesn't get more intimate than that. This was a grief spoon. You can almost see it. A widow stirring soup for one. A mother praying over a bowl as her child coughed nearby. Monk slurping quietly in a cold cell. This spoon wasn't shared, wasn't displayed. It was held, day after day, until the broth comforted. You sit for a long time, holding that spoon. Because for all the drama and ritual of ceremonial spoons, this one might matter most. Because here's the thing they never tell you about medieval kitchens. They weren't just places of fire and flour. They were places of emotion. Quiet, constant, daily emotion. And spoons, small, silly spoons, were often the only things that witnessed that. The hunger, the prayer, the first taste after illness. It's the last taste before loss. In these intimate spoons, they saw everything. You put the grief spoon back and closed the drawer gently, as if not to wake anyone. And now, in the hush that follows, you wonder, if your own kitchen drawer were unearthed 600 years from now, what would your spoon say? You leave the drawer of intimate spoons behind like someone stepping quietly out of a confessional booth, humbled, a little raw, and suddenly hyper-aware of your own sentimental attachment to that chipped blue soup spoon in your kitchen drawer. You know the one. The air grows cooler as you follow a narrowing corridor, lit only by flickering sconces you're no longer questioning. And when you enter the next room, it's clear the space isn't about memory or ceremony or secret codes. This room is about rules. Here they are. The Reglamenti dei Cucchiai, spoon regulations. Rows of scrolls line the walls, tagged with ribbons and wax seals. Dulled spoon silhouettes, measurement tables, and the unmistakable air of bureaucracy that not even centuries of dust can disguise. Welcome to the spoon laws, mainstream fact. By the late medieval period, especially in wealthy Italian city-states like Venice, Florence, and Siena, household inventories and guild regulations became incredibly precise. Kitchens were often managed according to written rules, and utensils, including spoons, were subject to specific guidelines, not just in size and material, but in who could use them, when, and how. You pick up one scroll titled Uso del Posate nella Casa di Commercio, use of utensils in the merchant house. It outlines which types of spoons are permitted during business dinners, penalties for improper presentation. One clause says, any spoon with gilding must be pre-approved by the accounting steward. Bureaucracy, medieval style. There's a thick manual marked Cucchiai da Servizio e da Castigo, service and punishment spoons. Punishment? You flip through carefully and discover. In some noble households, misuse of fine tableware resulted in spoon demotion. A servant caught using a ceremonial spoon to stir stew might be forced to eat with a wooden ladle for a week or worse. The Cucchiaio della Vergogna, the shame spoon. Oversized, ugly, and impossible to eat from without looking like a goose, quirky tidbit. In some kitchens, that shame spoon was mounted on the wall, not for use, but as a warning, like a culinary dunce cap. Some even had mocking rhymes carved on them, like, too fine for the broth, enjoy the slop. And these rules weren't just about class, they were also about hierarchy inside the kitchen. A 15th century Florentine document describes how each kitchen role had an assigned spoon. The capocuoco, or head cook, had the authority to use long-stemmed silver-backed spoons for tasting. The aiuto cuoco, assistant cook, was permitted only plain horn or iron. Apprentices got wood, and if they broke it, they stirred with a stick. Some of the rules are surprisingly detailed. You find a section on night service, which includes, in the hour after compline, should broth be requested, it is to be served only with the moon spoon silver, shallow and smooth, lest the guests be disturbed in their digestion by harsh edges. You don't know whether to laugh or applaud. The medieval concern for post-dinner comfort is oddly touching. Historians still argue whether these household spoon regulations were widespread or only typical in elite homes. Some say they were copied and traded between wealthy families like recipes. Others believe most homes followed a more informal pass-it-down tradition. But there's no doubt that in certain circles, spoons were governed as tightly as titles or land rights. One rulebook includes a whole chapter on spoons for guests of uncertain standing. Apparently, if you weren't sure whether a visitor ranked high enough for the silver set but didn't want to insult them with wood, you used pewter.
Middle ground. Literally, you find a drawing labeled spoon misuse chart.
There are illustrations of common offenses: stirring with a dessert spoon, serving fish with a wide bowled spoon, placing a handle on the table's edge like a peasant.
Next to each, a list of corrective actions.
Some of them are petty. One reads, if the third son of the host family is found using the soup spoon of the first son, he shall forfeit his second helping of meat. Classic younger sibling injustice. But others reflect real anxiety about order and presentation. A misplaced spoon could signal confusion, or worse, rebellion. In an age obsessed with protocol, The tiniest breach in utensil etiquette could unravel the whole visual hierarchy of the meal. And in a world where dinner could include not only your neighbors, but your political enemies, spoon drama was serious business. There's even a scroll sealed in red wax labeled Kukiai Proyedi, forbidden spoons. Forbidden? You break the seal cautiously and unroll the brittle parchment. Inside are records of outlawed spoon types. One was banned for being too similar to the PayPal style. Another was accused of unsettling guests due to its likeness to a surgical instrument. One was outlawed because it made a high-pitched whistle when it touched metal. The wailing spoon. It's too spooky for supper. Others were blacklisted for being excessively ornate, distracting from the food, or too secular during religious feasts. There's even a mention of spoons carved in human shapes arms, curved into bowls, which were banned for, encouraging irreverent thoughts. You wonder how many of these rogue spoons are still hidden in kitchen drawers, quietly undermining dinner parties. At the back of the room, you spot a shelf with ledgers labeled Sanzioni, penalties. They include not just servants, but household members fined for improper spoon use. Lady Eleonora de Medici fined one florin for using her cousin's wedding spoon without asking. Brother Piero reprimanded for letting a monk stir his barley with the abbess's travel spoon. It's all very petty and very human. And isn't that what rules often are? A reflection of what we care about, even if it's just spoons? Sit down on a stone bench and look back over the table of regulations, drawings, punishments, and protocols. In a way, this room is more intimate than the last, because rules are a kind of confession. They tell you what a culture feared, respected, desired. And these Italians? They wanted to eat properly, to serve with elegance, to follow form, even with broth. You can't help but smirk, because in your own cutlery drawer right now, there's probably a wrong spoon for yogurt that you still use anyway, a tarnished one that somehow tastes better. A rule breaker. And here, 600 years ago, someone else was breaking the same rule, with the exact same spoon. The room of regulations fades behind you, and now, as you pad into the next space, bare feet cold on ancient stone, you notice something immediately different. It's louder here. Not the clamor of voices or clinking plates. No, but the room hums with energy. You can almost hear it. Overlapping conversations, snippets of laughter, prayers, gossip, distant chanting, all echoing faintly like the walls themselves remember every spoonful ever served here. This is the room of communal spoons. A long wooden table stretches across the room, flanked by worn benches that sag slightly in the middle. Atop the table, resting like relics, are bundles of spoons, tied together with twine, leather cords, or strips of cloth. They are mismatched, many clearly handmade, and every single one bears the scuffs and smoothness of frequent use. You sit at the table and pick up a bundle. The spoons rattle like old bones. Here's the thing. You about to get a crash course in the weird and wondrous history of eating together, and what role spoons played in shaping not just meals, but community itself. Mainstream fact, in medieval Italian monasteries, convents, hospitals, and peasant homes, communal eating was not just normal, it was expected. Meals were taken from shared pots or bowls, especially among the lower classes. And it was common for several people to use the same spoon or share it sequentially. Germ theory, you'll be shocked to learn, was not yet trending. There's a spoon here, with 4 shallow bowls, branching off the same handle like petals. It looks absurd, almost like a game piece. But it was likely passed around a table, used by one person, wiped hastily, then handed to the next. You imagine the clumsy choreography of it, the unspoken etiquette. Don't double dip, don't linger, don't chew the handle. The same rules we follow at fondue night. Really, except these folks didn't have cheese. Just barley gruel and prayers. Another bundle reveals a set of folding spoons, attached like a Swiss Army knife. Each member of the family might carry one in their belt or around their neck, ready for use at the table, at market stalls, or in the field. Practical, compact, and just a bit schwaffy. There's a pouch labeled Fratelli Benedettin 1308, the Benedictine brothers. You open it to reveal a set of matching iron spoons with looped handles. They're identical, but on closer inspection, each is scratched with a name. Giovanni, Tommaso, Elia. These were used in rotation during meals in a monastery, assigned and redistributed weekly. If a monk broke his spoon or lost it, heaven forbid he fasted until a replacement could be made. A small failure, maybe, but in monastic life, where every act was symbolic, losing your spoon meant losing your discipline. Quirky tidbit: in some religious houses, there was a designated spoonkeeper, or custode del cucchiaio, a monk, responsible solely for cleaning, storing, and counting the spoons. It was both an honor and a curse. The role often went to someone either very trusted or very unpopular, occasionally both. But outside monasteries, the spoon-sharing practice took on more chaotic forms. You come across a leather-bound log labeled Casa di Misericordia Spizio del Dun, 1421, a poor house for women. The notes are sparse, but one passage reads, "Due to the theft of spoons during lentil rationing, spoons will henceforth be tied to the table with twine." And they weren't kidding, you see. One of the very spoons from that time. Thick wooden handle, bored through and strung with a piece of ancient cord. The idea wasn't just about theft. It was about fairness. Everyone got a spoon. No one took more than they should. Spooning became an act of equity. Historians still argue whether such tethered spoon systems were widespread or rare solutions for specific institutions. Some claim these setups were typical in prisons or orphanages. Others say they were invented locally, as stopgaps when utensils were scarce. Either way, they speak volumes about how shared eating was managed and monitored. You find a broken spoon with a jagged tip and a note carved into the handle. L'ultima volta, the last time. Whether that refers to a final meal, a final betrayal, just the last time someone got to sit at the table before being sent elsewhere? You can't say. But the sentiment hangs heavy. Still, not all communal spoon use was bleak. You discover a woven basket containing a dozen simple birch spoons painted in bright, sloppy colors. They're chipped and stained, but cheerful. These were children's spoons, likely passed around in a communal nursery or village school. Some even have tiny bells attached to the ends of their handles. Why? Because apparently, medieval toddlers also liked to throw things. And if your spoon made a noise, at least you could find it. You chuckled to yourself, because that's the thing. Even in a world of plague, politics, in PayPal power plays, people still had to get toddlers to eat mush with bells tied to birchwood. The communal spoon was rarely elegant, but it was central and everywhere. You lean over the table again, this time noticing a map etched into the surface beneath the spoon's faint, but visible. It shows several regions of Italy, with different towns labeled not by name, but by spoon type. Notes like Montefiascone, Tupper household, one shared. Lucca communal until baptism, then personal, Napoli. Market spoons tied with color string to avoid mix-ups. You realize that spoon customs weren't just about class or religion, they were regional identities, just like dialects or recipes. In some areas, passing a spoon after eating was a sign of trust. In others, it was an insult, as if to say, "I'm done. You take my scraps." The subtleties were endless, and the etiquette could be fierce. One final artifact catches your eye. It's a single, oversized copper spoon. Heavy, worn down to a dull shimmer. The bowl is wide enough to hold a fist. The handle is etched with dozens of initials, layered over each other until it looks almost like a tree trunk carved with names. This was the family spoon. Used at weddings, funerals, births, and feast days. Passed hand to hand, stirring pots big enough to feed a whole street. It's dented, it's ugly, it's magnificent. Because in a world that often separated people by wealth, gender, class, or faith, the communal spoon was a small, imperfect bridge. You place the spoon back with a quiet reverence. And for the first time tonight, you feel something shift. Not just understanding, but belonging. You leave the communal table behind slowly, like someone exiting a chapelure, a really intense potluck. The air shifts again as you pass through a narrow stone arch, brushing your shoulder against a tapestry that smells faintly of wax and lavender. This next room is quieter, private, dimly lit by a single swinging lamp that casts warm shadows across the walls. In the middle of the room is a low table, and on it, arranged with almost obsessive precision, are spoons unlike anything you've seen so far. These are performance spoons. Yes, we've reached the theatrical portion of tonight's journey. You sink into a cushioned bench that lets out the softest sigh of air, and your eyes take in the glimmering display. These aren't kitchen tools. These are instruments of spectacle designed not to feed, but to impress or deceive or entertain. During the Italian Renaissance, the boundaries between utility and performance blurred. Wealthy courts hosted extravagant banquets where utensils became props in a larger drama of power and refinement. Especially in Florence and Milan, spoons were sometimes gilded, custom-shaped, or engraved with puzzles, poems, and family crests, sought to convey social standing and aesthetic taste. You spot one spoon with a mirrored underside, another with a hollow handle that, when tipped, releases a puff of perfumed vapor. One appears to whistle a delicate note if you swirl it clockwise in a thin broth. Subtle, dramatic, weirdly expensive. You pick up a long, slender spoon with a twist in the middle of its handle, deliberate, almost like a dancer frozen mid-spin. The bowl is impossibly small, maybe a teaspoon's third cousin. It seems impractical until you read the tiny inscription along the edge. For the tasting of perfumes, yes, perfume. Apparently, some aristocrats commissioned scent spoons, which were used at table not for flavor, but for inhaling between courses. A whiff of rosemary between the duck and the peared tart to refresh the humors. You imagine a duke sniffing his spoon mid-supper. Nose turned skyward, like he's auditioning for a soap commercial. Quirky tidbit? A few households took this performative cutlery obsession further and held utensil unveilings where new spoons or forks were presented with music and applause. Sometimes guests were given souvenir spoons, embossed with a family motto or flirtatious message. Think wedding favors, but more gold and less edible. You hold one now. It's small, heart-shaped, and reads, Tanto dolce quanto il mio, sweet as honey, cute, and possibly passive-aggressive, depending on context. Historians still argue whether these ornate spoons were ever meant to be used or were simply symbolic. Some claim they were functional, while others suggest they served more like conversation pieces meant to be admired, not dipped in soup. But there's evidence both ways, and really, who among us hasn't owned a ridiculous kitchen gadget just in case? One especially elaborate spoon has a split bowl, one side gold, the other silver. A tiny dial at the base rotates between dolce and salato, sweet and salty. You give it a gentle spin, and it clicks with a satisfying thunk. Totally useless, deeply satisfying. At the far end of the table is a trio of spoons in a velvet-lined case. Their labels read like characters in a play. Il cucchiaio della fortuna, the spoon of fortune. Il cucchiaio del traditore, the spoon of the traitor. Il cucchiaio del giullare, the spoon of the jester. They were apparently used in a courtly game played during noble feasts. Serving maid would distribute the spoons at random before dessert, and each one came with a fate. The fortune spoon meant the recipient got to keep their dessert and request a second helping. The traitor spoon meant they had to surrender theirs to someone else. The jester. You had to make up a rhyming toast on the spot or skip your wine. A spoon-based social minefield. What could possibly go wrong? You think back to modern dinner parties? That awkward moment when someone grabs the wrong glass, or eats too fast, or confuses a dip bowl for soup? Multiply that by 10. Add powdered wigs and a live lute performance, and you're getting close. But not all performance spoons were about games and flirtation. One display shows a series of mourning spoons, black and silver, engraved with sobering quotes. They were used at memorial feasts, meant to convey grief through every gesture. One says simply, Esce la zuppa piange, even the soup weeps. Another, more haunting, is shaped like a tear. The bowl narrows to a point, completely unusable, but undeniably beautiful. You can almost feel the heavy silence of a banquet where that spoon passed hand to hand like a shared sigh. Spoons weren't just tools, they were theater. Part costume, part prop. Every flick of the wrist, every choice of material or shape or shine told a story. You glance up and realize the walls are lined not with shelves, but mirrors angled to reflect the spoons in infinite variations. One corner of the room even has a raised platform with a single spoon on a pedestal beneath a spotlight. The plaque says, Cucchiaio della Fama, Siena, 1489, the Spoon of Fame. Legend goes that this spoon was once held by a famed poet at a banquet where he recited a sonnet while ladling wine-soaked cherries from a crystal bowl. The poem and the cherries were so sublime that women fainted and a painter in the crowd began sketching on the tablecloth. Is the story true? Probably not, but the spoon, real heavy. With a pearl-inlaid handle and tiny star engravings so fine they could be been done with a BS foot, you stare at your own reflection holding the spoon face distorted in the warped metal in wonder. Has any modern utensil made you feel this dramatic? Probably not. And maybe that's what this room really celebrates. The idea that even something as simple as a spoon could be transformed into a symbol of status, humor, sorrow, flirtation, or fame, that with the right story and the right stage, any object can become extraordinary. Even a soup scoop, even now. You step softly from the mirrored chamber of performative spoons into a darker corridor, quieter, heavier somehow. The stone underfoot is uneven now, older. Moss clings to the mortar between the blocks. You can hear your own breath again, slow and steady, and the whisper of your footsteps like a monk's chant. This is the final room. And as your eyes adjust to the low amber glow of lanterns flickering on iron hooks, you realize what you're walking into. This is the room of forgotten spoons. Dust hangs in the air. Stillness coats everything. The air is thick with the scent of time leather, parchment, faint mildew, a memory of fire. Unlike the previous rooms, this one doesn't celebrate or explain. It doesn't perform or enforce. It simply remembers. These are spoons no one uses anymore. No one really talks about. You pass a shelf labeled unfinished. The spoons here are lopsided, whittled halfway, or snapped just past the bowl. Some are burnt. One is melted into a small glass lump, like someone left it too close to a fire and walked away forever. Another is carved from chalky limestone, crumbled at the edges, clearly impractical. Someone made it anyway. Each has a small tag with a name, or sometimes just a word. Pietro fell ill. Christina drafted into service. Madonna abandoned. You don't know who Madonna was? But her spoon, if it ever fed anyone, did so briefly. It's a mainstream fact. Many spoons from the Middle Ages, especially among lower classes, never received names or decoration because their makers never had the time, tools, or resources to personalize them. Life was too short, wood was too scarce, famine, war, or plague often cut stories off before they could take root. Quirky tidbit? In some parts of southern Italy, especially during outbreaks of disease or wartime conscription, unfinished spoons were deliberately left on windowsills or hung from trees. It was a gesture of mourning, almost like a flag saying someone who once ate here no longer does. And here's the strangest part. Some scholars argue these half-spoons eventually inspired certain mourning customs in later centuries. But historians still argue whether that connection is real or romanticized by later folklorists looking to add drama to simple hunger. You wander deeper, small narrow drawers labeled prison spoons. Inside, thin, flat slivers of iron and bone, some carved into shanks. Others hollowed slightly, useless for eating, but perfect for scraping mortar or hiding tiny messages. One has a note tucked beneath it, scratched a love poem into the wall, cell 4. You imagine a prisoner tracing letters with the tip of his spoon again and again until the stone yielded. It wasn't the spoon's job, but the spoon didn't complain. A different shelf, high and out of reach, holds spoons encased in wax, their handles trapped in thick honey-colored seals. You tilt your head to read the barely visible text etched in Latin and Tuscan dialects. These were ceremonial seal spoons used once to stir a wedding soup, then dipped in beeswax and saved as relics of the day. The wax preserves not just the object, but the memory. You think of the weddings where these spoons danced hands, brushing as a couple shared the first bite of something warm and hopeful. Now they rest here in silence. It's preserved, but no longer warm. Your fingers graze a shadowy alcove, revealing a shallow basket of spoons with broken handles. All the bowls are intact, as if the users held on until the end. There's something about that feels ... honorable. You find one spoon, tiny and dull, with the word Ultima scratched into the handle. The last one. It's unclear whose, or for what. But somehow, that spoon feels heavier than the golden ones. The light here is softer now, almost dimming on its own. You reach the last display, a single pedestal beneath a cracked glass dome. Inside, resting on velvet the color of dried blood, is what's simply called Il Cucchiaio Senza Nome. The spoon without a name. It's plain, rounded, a little warped. The bowl has been mended with a strip of tin. The handle is unadorned, but worn smooth by use. You can picture 1,000 meals passing through it, 1,000 stories, and no one wrote them down. No inscription, no record. Just a tool that served quietly and consistently until someone placed it here. Maybe it belonged to a woman who fed 5 children alone. Maybe a man who never returned from war. Maybe it passed between hands during a famine or a harvest, or simply in the ordinary rhythm of days. The not knowing is the point. Because this spoon, like so many others, never needed a title. It never needed gold. It just needed to feed someone. That's what makes it sacred. You stand a while longer, surrounded by silence and dust and the ghosts of dinners long gone. No more spotlights. No more riddles or etiquette. Just the enduring echo of small, humble gestures. A spoon lifted. A hunger eased. A memory held in the curve of wood or metal. You step back from the display, slower now. Your breathing deepens. And as the room fades into shadows, you feel yourself fade with it, weightless, full, quiet. It's almost time to sleep now. Let everything slow. The edges of your thoughts begin to soften like the rim of a well-worn spoon. Sanded by time and touch, no longer sharp, only familiar. Let your limbs go heavy. Let your eyelids lower just a little. There's nothing else you need to do tonight. Nowhere else you need to go. You've wandered through 1,000 years of simple tools and complicated customs. Of monks and mothers and jester spoons with rhyming penalties. You've passed gilded silver and carved birch, relics of joy and grief and boredom so deep it led someone to name a spoon just for broth. You've seen spoons that sparked arguments, ones that survived war, and others that never made it past the workshop bench. And now they all rest together in the great quiet archive of sleep. So picture that last room again, the one filled with silence. The air cool and still, dust drifting like snow in the candlelight. A spoon rests in your palm. You don't know whose it was. You don't need to. It's warm from your hand now. You curl your fingers around it gently, like closing a book. And just for a moment, before the dreams come, you listen to the hush of history. A hush full of clinking bowls, quiet prayers, belly laughter, and the low murmur of stories passed, spoon to spoon. Let that hush carry you. Let the weight of the world dissolve, like a sugar cube melting into broth. You are safe, you are full, and you are home.